to Slow Medicine Radio. Our host is Integrative Medicine Dr. Michael Finkelstein. Michael offers medical advice from a holistic paradigm, including both medical and metaphysical philosophies from the full spectrum of human experience. Slow Medicine Radio offers fresh ideas on how to attain a state of wellness that seems distant given the limitations of today's medical paradigm. It introduces you to thought leaders who connect the dots between theory and practice, examining health from a broad perspective with regards to medical diagnoses, conventional and alternative therapies, healthcare policy, and related topics that warrant further thought and discussion. Slow Medicine Radio does not prescribe to take this or do that. Instead, it offers an open-minded, intelligent, and practical approach to living, resulting in greater health individually and collectively. Here is Dr. Michael Finkelstein, the founder of Sunraven, the home of slow medicine in Bedford, New York.
Welcome to Slow Medicine Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Finkelstein, and we're here every Monday at 5 o'clock at 1460 on your AM dial and worldwide at WVOX.com. And the mission of this program is to help you live your life, help you deal with what you might think of as ailments, and put them into a place where you can transform them, at least not allow them to get in your way, to inflame your body, to diminish your spirit, to simply interfere with what it is that you want to accomplish while you're alive. And, you know, when I went to medical school, my initial thought on that subject was that if I help people help their body or deal with their bodies, I would help them resolve the obstacles and then just help them in that way get back into their life. And over the years of first decade or two of my practice, I was becoming as frustrated as my patients that physical-only approach didn't work as well as I had hoped. I didn't give up, though. I went back to school and I studied integrative medicine to understand perhaps the other philosophies of health and healing and the other systems of medicine practiced all over the world and throughout history. And along the way, I met a lot of interesting people. Eventually, as you know, I wrote my book, Slow Medicine, and it was when it was released about a year and a half ago when I met my guest today, Dr. Martin Rossman, who assisted me in one of my presentations on the West Coast near where he lived in Marin County. And I learned about his work, which well preceded mine. In fact, in many ways, he influenced what I had learned in the subject of mind-body medicine. And he's the real deal. This is a man who, like I did, went to medical school to study medicine and to practice, but early on understood the relationship between the mind and the body in particular. And his work evolved. He still practices. He's written several books, including Guided Imagery for Self-Healing, which was an award-winning self-help book. More recently, The Worry Solution. And about 3 weeks ago, I was turning the channels and looked at PBS, where I saw my friend with his new show so nicely produced called The Healing Mind, and gave him a call and invited him to be my guest today. So Dr. Rossman, Marty, thank you for joining me on Slow Medicine Radio.
Well, thanks for having me, Michael. It was nice to hear from you, and I appreciate being with you today.
So, you know, a lot of times when I talk to people and they present to me with a complaint, usually that complaint is something about their body not working as well as they like. I mean, they could have a specific ailment, a medical diagnosis like cancer or heart disease, or they could just have a general complaint, I'll call it, like I just don't feel well or I just don't have the energy. You know, something's not right. A lot of people these days look on the internet, they work on themselves, people understand the importance of nutrition, of dealing with stress, but yet when I start the subject, which is, you know, there may be other things like what goes on in your mind that is affecting your body, I notice a lot of resistance. It's sort of very often a tendency, I wouldn't say it's universal, but a tendency for people to think, well, you know, but my body, focus on my body. And I imagine you've dealt with that as well.
Yeah, it's more the rule than the exception, really. Although I think that's starting to change, at least out in my area in California. I think it's changing a bit, but you know, our body's an expressor, as you well know, Michael. Our body expresses how it feels, and it expresses not only physiologic imbalances. It can certainly express make noises or have symptoms, if there's nutritional deficiencies, if there's a toxic load, if there's genetic malfunction that's not allowing part of the body to operate well. But it also expresses our emotions. Our body is run unconsciously, as you know. You can't possibly run a body of 7,500 trillion cells that all hang together pretty well over time. With your conscious mind, you just couldn't possibly do it, even if you knew how to do it. So that process has evolved over billions of years, and it generally runs by itself pretty well if you give it half a chance. I think what we don't generally acknowledge in our culture is that when the body starts to express symptoms, be it pain or fatigue or any of the other symptoms that it's capable of expressing, whether rashes or wheezing or sneezing or coughing or trouble sleeping or anxiety or depression. These are symptoms of a body being out of balance, and something that I learned early on in my study of mind-body medicine is that very often the body is expressing discomfort, it's expressing an excess of stress, it's expressing a need that we often don't know how to hear. I talk to my patients a lot, and I say, well, you can take your car in these days, and they'll plug it into a computer, and it'll tell the computer what it needs. Our body's much more sophisticated than a car, and much more sophisticated than the computer on a car. But I think we've kind of lost the ability to tune in and listen to our body. So one of the first things that I will often do with people is ask them, if you could tune into your body, if your body could talk to you, if your body could express itself. And sometimes we do that with guided imagery. Sometimes I'll just do it and say, if your body could talk to you and tell you what it needs, what do you think it would tell you? And it starts to get them tuned in, and it's really quite astounding, very often what people will say. They'll say, I'm just working too hard. I have too much on my plate. I'm overstressed. I'm overextended. And in that way, the symptom is kind of like the oil light or a gauge in the car. It's not trying to hurt you. It's giving you feedback. And again, if we extend that metaphor, you would never take your car in. I don't know what kind of car you drive, but whatever kind of car you drive, you would never take it into the mechanic and say, my oil light's on, and I'd like you to cut the wire to it, because it's making me very nervous, or put a piece of tape over the light. You'd never do that. You'd say, why is the oil light on? Take a look under the hood. And so people are asking us to do the same thing, and if you're right, people are sensitive to it. In our culture, it's accepted that people can go to the doctor if they're having a problem, but it's still, even in 2016, much less acceptable, to go to a counselor or to a therapist. There's still a bit of a pejorative valuation of that. So you can go to the doctor and say, my head hurts and I've got these headaches and my neck is stiff all the time. The doctor says maybe it's stress. The person might be open to that once the doctor examines them, does whatever testing is needed, and finds, well, there's not a brain tumor, there's not an abscess, there's not a case of meningitis. Then most of the time it is a reaction to being overstressed and overtense. It's widely estimated by government agencies and researchers alike that something like 75, I've heard figures as high as 75 to 90% of all visits to primary care doctors are directly or indirectly due to stress.
Yeah. And I think you point out the quality of the stigmatization of a mental health issue, because we lump it all together with people who are profoundly depressed, suicidal, homicidal, antisocial. We put all those behaviors and maybe some of the most severe manifestations of a true health imbalance in the mental health arena with how an average person deals with average stress. And as a result, we cut off potentially a vast, and I think you would probably agree with this, a vast opportunity for us to really help manage the symptoms that bring us to the doctor as often and sort of affect our day-to-day.
Oh, I agree 100%. And so we as doctors, we need, and of course you know that we don't get very much, if any, training really in how to address this and how to talk to people about that. I saw a recent study where something like, survey of primary care doctors where the consensus was that 90% of their patients are overly stressed, are just carrying too high a stress burden over too long a time. And only in 3% of the doctor's encounters with patients was that ever mentioned.
Right. And that's just mentioning it, acknowledging it, let alone really providing some useful, constructive advice as to how a person could begin to manage it.
Right. And for the doctors, I mean, this fits right into, your brilliant idea of slow medicine. It just doesn't fit our dominant medical model. The doctors are stressed as anybody can be. Their fees are cut to shreds. They mostly work for corporations. If they don't, the patients are asking them to bill insurance companies who cut their fees to shreds. They're expected to see a certain number of patients per hour. And all you can do is try to pigeonhole people and identify the most, serious or dangerous medical, conditions. And then what can you do in 5 to 10 minutes? All you can do is write prescriptions. Even if you had the skills, you don't have the time to do it. So we have to make resources available. Actually, that's one of the reasons I started The Healing Mind, the website, thehealingmind.org, to provide self-care books and CDs and audios that can teach people how to relax, how to reduce stress, how to manage stress better, because it is the number one risk factor for every major chronic disease in developed cultures. There's no doubt about it. All the other risk factors that we know about, the overeating, the eating of junk food, the drinking too much, the smoking, the use of drugs, the reliance on pharmaceuticals, 95% of the time those are because people are trying to cope with their stress. We aren't taught the skills, we aren't encouraged to use them, and so we use these other coping methods to try to get through the day, and they do help us get through the day. The only problem with them, of course, is that over time they're quite toxic, and the toxicity builds up over time. So I'm totally empathetic to people who are trying to calm themselves down and trying to reduce their stress, but if you're going to do it through drinking or smoking or sugar or, on a habitual basis, ultimately the toxicity is going to get you. You're going to develop diabetes, you're going to develop high blood pressure, you're going to develop coronary artery disease, you're going to develop these, quote, diseases of civilization, unquote. As we get more really civilized, we won't need to do that, and there'll be a much, much lower incidence of all those diseases.
Well, that's, brings us to why I have this show as well, as what you're describing as part of the initiative for creating your own work, The Healing Mind, the books, the opportunity for people to really get this directly and work on it directly, because, we can talk about the medical establishment and its limitations for a lot longer, but I think the point of this show really is to help people hear a message that they could take home with them right now and incorporate into their lives to make a difference. And I think hopefully some doctors are listening because they could use it themselves as well. Or
refer patients to it. And for the people who are listening, I think I think you do a good job of this. It's important to point out that, we confuse medical care for health care. Mm-hmm. And, you've talked about this and written about this. It's, your real primary care health practitioner is you. And so it's upon us. There's lots of resources now available, and people can learn these simple methods for, abdominal breathing, taking some time, relaxing the body, just taking a little escape breath, letting your body shift from that over-adrenalized fight or flight response, constantly battling with threats, real or imagined, and let your body shift into that parasympathetically mediated, relaxation response where the innate healing abilities of the body can function at a higher level of efficiency, and do that on some kind of a regular basis. It's remarkable how many symptoms go away. If I can get a patient to do that for 3 weeks, if I write him a prescription, I give him a 20-minute relaxation audio. I say, if you'll do that for 3 weeks, I'd like to see how many of your symptoms are left. And a huge majority of their symptoms, pain, the anxiety, the cravings, the trouble sleeping, and so on, go away in that 3 weeks, and then we can start to deal with whatever's left.
I think that's a really important suggestion. What is, though, the number one reason why you think people who hear that, and it makes so much sense.
Why people what?
Why, when people hear that advice, get their prescription from you, if 100% of people don't follow it, what is the reason you think, a group of people hear it, they understand the logic, and yet they have a hard time taking that step?
Well, let me say right off the top, I still practice, full time, and that's a very common prescription for me to write. And to tell you the truth, you're a doctor, you may recognize it. I'm always shocked when somebody actually does it. It's extremely rare for somebody to actually do that. But if I prescribe twice a day for 3 weeks, a lot of times people will do it 3 or 4 times a week. Right. And even when they do that, they start to experience benefit, and it takes them a step towards, hey, there's really something here. I not only feel better when I take this 20, 25 minutes to do this process, but as I repeat it, it's easier for me to do it, and I feel even better. And it's a step towards developing, a new health-oriented kind of habit. I think the main reason people don't do it is because our lives are already too compressed. With our to-do lists are already too long. And a lot of people, all this incredible digital media, these incredible cell phones. I love my cell phone. Because I'm of that age now where, well, first of all, nobody can remember all the things that are known anymore. And when I graduated medical school in 1969, I think it was right at the end of the era where you could even attempt to try to know everything that was known in medicine. We would compete with each other to quote the studies to the chief residents and the professors. You probably remember that. But shortly after that, just the enormity of the amount of research and medical information that just changes day by day, it's too big for anybody to remember. Now we have this little device, and we can look up anything that's known and anything that's published. So I think they're absolutely wonderful, but they've actually resulted in us having less downtime, not more downtime.
Yeah, that's the paradox.
And, all this stuff was supposed to increase our leisure time, and it hasn't, because you can know anything, you can talk to anybody, you can text anybody, you can FaceTime with anybody, and more is expected at work, and more is expected with the family, and just the whole idea of downtime is pretty much a casualty for what I can see. I mean, I know my daughters and some of their friends who are pretty smart young people, they do something called a digital detox. And they periodically they'll take a weekend, or they might even take a week. That's very unusual, but they might take a day or 2 days and just put all their digital devices away, because they know if they don't, it's just going to be constant. People are up in the middle of the night looking at these blue light screens on their iPads and their smartphones, and again, we can access so much information. A lot of it's junk, but some of it's great, and it just never stops. And if we don't hit the off button, both on the devices and on our own brains periodically, we're just going to burn out. So I think the main reason is it comes off, and I struggle with this, and I try to let people know, it's not just another chore to do, because that's how it often comes up. I'm already overloaded. How can you ask me now to do another chore that's going to take me 20 or 25 minutes?
Right.
Yeah, I think that's the major thing. I think people are aware of the immense amount of research that's been done on relaxation techniques and guided imagery and mindfulness meditation and the relaxation response. And there's the effects of these very simple and very pleasant processes are widespread, and everybody from Mayo Clinic to Johns Hopkins to Harvard to Stanford to MD Anderson, every major medical center advocates the use of stress management, relaxation techniques, and the importance of good mind-body hygiene, because there's so much research on it. But again, if it just seems like, when am I going to do this? Where am I going to do this? And you have to make a choice. People have to make this choice. They have to say, and I sometimes tell them, look, it's just like your iPhone. You have to charge it. You have to plug it into the charger. And especially if you're starting to miss sleep now, you're not getting that kind of recharge. You also need to just put it down a couple times a day and plug it into the charger. Your brain needs the same thing.
I think, part of what we suffer from is the cultural wave, where it's pushing us to keep moving. Even the concept, the quality discussed of progress and being productive. These are words, of course, that make some sense on some level, but we've taken it to the extreme. And if we're not constantly moving toward goals, one could look at it the other way and say, gee, you're lazy. You're not being, you're not going to be successful. There's something qualitatively undervalued about downtime. And as a result, we're moving constantly at 60 miles an hour. And everyone knows who drives. If you think you're going to stop when you're driving 60 miles an hour, it takes you a lot longer. Whereas if you're going 15 miles an hour, like on a bicycle, you could actually stop and smell the flowers on the side of the road. You're certainly not going to do that in a car.
Right.
And so part of the...
But it's going to take you 17 hours to get into New York City.
Well, so that's the part of it, is to find a culture, find support. To me, a lot of it, instead of thinking of this as an individual project, think about, sort of identifying friends, community, where this becomes the new way of doing things. And that maybe once a week you actually do all collectively go to the park or take a ride on a bicycle or have dinner at a friend's house. And just knowing that if you don't have the support and you don't work this out by being ahead of yourself, almost, the way people set their alarm clock, 10 minutes ahead, just so that they, deal with the reality, which is they'd like to hit the snooze bar. This is sort of how we can actually do this.
That's a very good idea.
I wanted to take a break. I wanted to give the number out so people can call us maybe, and if you have some time. And
sure.
So field some calls. Maybe one of the questions I could put out there is, what maybe gets you stuck so that you don't get started with a plan like taking some time off, working with your mind by easing up, dealing with stress, doing something like guided imagery or meditation. Maybe those of you who are listening could call in and help us understand what goes on in your mind. That's in the form of resistance. So we, as physicians, as practitioners, people who care about you, could learn and maybe do our jobs a little better. So that number is 914-636-0110. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, we'll continue this conversation with Dr. Martin Rossman. So stay with us.
You're listening to Slow Medicine Radio. You can find out more about the show and the work of Dr. Michael Finkelstein by visiting his website, slowmedicinedoctor.com. Slow Medicine Radio is sponsored by the Slow Medicine Foundation, dedicated to providing community-centered, experiential, and reflective learning for individuals, families, and groups, offering educational programs, events, and resources, as well as insightful health evaluations with customized medical guidance. Dr. Finkelstein works with his wife, Robin Queen Finkelstein, at their farm, Sunraven, in Bedford, New York. And they invite you to visit and take advantage of this unique resource, including men's and women's groups and couples programs. If you think about it, much of what we experience when we don't feel well is a result of the fast world and how it affects us. Therefore, if fast is the disease, then slow is the medicine. Visit Sunraven, the home of slow medicine in Bedford, New York. Go to slowmedicinedoctor.com or call 914-218-3113. And thank you for tuning in Mondays at 5 p.m. right here on 1460 WVOX.
Well, welcome back to Slow Medicine Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Finkelstein, and I'm speaking with Dr. Martin Rossman, who is the author of several books, including Guided Imagery for Self-Healing and The Worry Solution, and recently featured on a PBS special called The Healing Mind, where he produced a whole series of audio and video materials to help you, if you're not feeling already from this conversation compelled to take the next step. I think some of this material that I saw, at least, really was so well done. Marty, I really wanted to compliment you on the quality and the organization of that material.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it and learned a lot. You know, one of the things that when I was listening to it, that I thought was very, very interesting was the discussion of the concept of worry and how there are things we worry about that fall into different categories, one of which is things we can actually do something about, other things we can't really do anything about. Yet, in our minds and in our body's response to our mind, the physiological implications are largely the same, whether we can or can't do something. So how worry is itself, this perseveration of mind, is something that just adds more to this subject of stress.
Yeah, definitely. You know, as I was thinking about writing this book and thinking about, well, is there anything that I could possibly add to what we know about stress and stress management? And I thought about stress as a physical reaction to things that you perceive as a threat, and the anxiety part of it being the emotional reaction. And then the worry is the thinking part of it, the cognitive part, and that happens in the biggest part of the brain, in the forebrain, the part that we have some, once we perceive something as a threat, it happens instantaneously. This goes into the oldest part of our nervous system and our hormonal system, and the body reacts instantaneously to it. If it's something emotional that we haven't identified, that's also in a kind of a deeper and older and harder to access part of the brain. But the worry is the thinking part of it. These things are all intertwined. They're not exactly the same, but they're very much intertwined. And because it's a thinking function and because it's in the newest part of the brain, we have a chance to recognize when we're doing it, how we're thinking, and we have a chance to change that if we recognize that some of that worry is dysfunctional. So I think, I think that worry is actually an adaptive function. It's a useful thing that our ancestors learned to do. It's kind of taking a problem or a concern or a fear and kind of turning it over and over and over in our minds, kind of like you do with a tangled ball of twine, and looking for the loose ends that you can pull apart, and then it gets stuck again. You turn it over and over, and you find another loose place. And if you keep doing that, eventually you can untangle that ball of twine. I think that that's what worry's for. It helps us solve problems kind of in advance. If one of your ancestors was thinking about going hunting for something, and it remembered that the last time the hunting party went out, they took that particular path, and half of them didn't come back because they ran into a predator. Well, they might turn that over and decide, I'm going to go down this other path, and I'm going to take some guys with me, and I'm going to take some weapons, and I'm going to try to avoid getting hurt or killed. So it helps us avoid problems. It helps us solve problems in advance if it's used properly, and I call that good worry. It's a functional, problem-solving, danger-avoiding process that helps us survive. But what very easily happens, Michael, is that the worry becomes a habit, a bad habit. It becomes very unconscious, and people start to worry about things that they can't possibly do anything about. They start to worry as a habit, and the worry itself starts to create problems itself because your brain and your nervous system start to react to these things that are threats and dangers and things that you don't want to have happen. And it stimulates the same anxiety and stress response in your body that a real threat, a threat from outside would cause. And so people end up living in this highly aroused kind of bath of stress juices through in their body. And that line between good worry that solves problems and bad worry that creates problems, there's a gray zone there. And one of the most interesting things I learned in my research as I was writing the book is that, there's actually been research done, psychological research on how many worries never come true. And it's 85% of the time. 85% of the things people worry about never come true. Now, that doesn't mean... Now, there are real things to worry about, God knows. I'm not saying in this book, don't worry. I'm just saying, is this worry... Are you worrying about something? Is this a problem that you can possibly solve or take action on? Or are you just reviewing and self-hypnotizing yourself with all these things that you don't want to have happen and stirring up an ongoing stress response? So I have processes in the Worry Solution, the book and the CD set, for both bad worry and good worry, for what to do with bad worry and how to be more effective at good worry. If I can mention, the one thing I found most interesting is I think the reason we developed this bad worry habit is because 85% of the things we worry about don't come true. I think what happens is the brain decides that it didn't come true because it worried about it,
Right.
And it gets rewarded for that. So then you go on to start worrying about all the other things you don't want to have come true. But of course, it's superstitious. That's not really why it didn't happen. It just didn't happen because most of those things don't happen. But as the brain gets rewarded, then people start to become habitual worriers. They have trouble turning it off in the daytime. They have trouble turning it off at nighttime. They start living in this constantly hyper-aroused, stressful state, and that takes it's like running your car on super methane fuel. It's like it just burns it out faster. You have to, A, interrupt that, and B, learn to differentiate between good worry and bad worry, learn a way to stop doing bad worry, which I can teach you, and learn a way to make your good worry, your adaptive worry, even more efficient, which I can also teach you to do.
I think that's such a key message, which is there's a way to intervene. We know, we know this. Most people would agree that most of the time they worry, it never manifests as truth. And even if they fall into that false sense of security that it was because of worry that they blocked it, they probably would realize they're spending a lot of their energy.
A huge amount of extra energy.
And maybe they would just want to conserve that energy so that they can focus on something more purely pleasurable or, relationship building during that same time. So people might say, gee, so this is interesting, and you have many, specific techniques that you could share, where people can actually push a button, in essence. They have to learn a practice. They have to practice it. They have to have it ready to go when they need it, and they have to have the awareness and the consciousness around it. But there are ways that people do this successfully, and I would surmise that if you go from 85% to 50% of time in terms of spent, not necessarily the amount of times worry prevents the problem, but if you just reduce the amount of worry, let's say by half, boy, how much of a net gain of energy and time. And we know that the worry response in the body, this sympathetic nervous system, is inflammatory, is degenerative. It contributes to the subjective enhancement of any symptomatology that we have. And so we have an immediate impact with maybe something as simple as 20 minutes twice a day. But I want to get back to that question, which is what stops people, and what stops you if you're listening, and the number to call is 914-636-0110. What stops you from, when you hear something like this, and even if you get a very practical plan, something that you know you can do, what stops you from actually spending the 20 minutes a day, the 40 minutes a day, to do this? Is it that you're so busy? Is that you don't have the energy? Tell us, share with us what goes on in your own mind, because I think you're not going to be the only one who feels that way, and maybe we can gain some more insight in our own work. It's interesting to me that people again hear this often. Now, as you said, more and more over time. Because when we went to medical school, perhaps this wasn't spoken of much at all, and certainly not in the public. But with the advent of the internet, global information technology, people are sharing stories. They're sharing similar points of view and experiences, including how stress is affecting them, and even some of the solutions that they have found. There's this wherewithal now.
Mm-hmm. There's a much bigger recognition of it, and how damaging it can be, and how important it is to kind of manage it. Because I think it's just life is stressful. I mean, even a more natural life, which we haven't lived in developed countries for quite a long time, and we kind of live in that stress like fish live in water. So we don't. Mm-hmm. We take it as normal and as sort of given, and don't even recognize it. Once you start to recognize it, then there are really a lot of resources out there that you can take advantage of. But it's funny, it's a decision that we have to make, because there are temptations, there are distractions, there are, like you said, social pressures, work pressures, family pressures, and so on and so forth. It's something you really have to fight for, initially at least. And like you said, developing friendships and relationships, and in your marriage, and even with your children, to teach them that you don't. It's really very counterculture to teach that it's really valuable to slow down, like you say, to enjoy your life, and to enjoy some serendipity, and to enjoy relationships that you have, and that these things do unfold much more slowly than the pace of modern life. It's really quite counterculture, as you know, and I think developing the whole idea of slow medicine and the foundation in the book and so on is a great contribution. I hope it'll take root and grow.
I think it is. It's interesting. When I did my researches, and when I just lived my life, there was a time where I would hearken for the old days, where life was simpler, where sat around a campfire, and of course that, as you pointed out, that those weren't times of complete freedom. There were wild animals right outside the camp. When trees fell and you got hurt, there weren't hospitals to go to get repaired. When you had an infection, there wasn't an antibiotic. I mean, life was not a breeze. By any means. However, I think that the culture of the time had a lot more moments where slow was the operative word, that people did sit around the campfire, that there weren't as many options for diversions and distractions. There weren't people walking into the woods by themselves necessarily, because that was perhaps a life-threatening activity. So people hung out together. They followed the rhythms and the cycles of the natural world. They were in sync, not completely stress-free, but in sync. Mm-hmm. And as a result, I think collectively they managed stress. Mm-hmm. And now, you use that word decision, we have to decide to do that, because we have these other options. And, they're very tempting, these other options. And they could feel good in the moment. Right. We do have tremendous capacity to withstand all sorts of trauma and toxic load. It's pretty remarkable.
Mm-hmm, that's true, too.
So we can sort of get away with it. And there are a lot of people getting away with it at any one time. Just go to the local bar. Right. And you sort of see that there's you can find a community of people that are doing the other things. Mm-hmm. So I think part of the trick is, and that's why we our office essentially is a small working farm where we invite people to an environment where they could spend a lot of time, not just in and out for the office visit, but encouraged to sit and have lunch with us, or walk around to pick the eggs out of the coop, or garden with us. Come and spend an evening tomorrow. Tomorrow is the new moon, and we have a monthly new moon gathering. So we just sit around and you could say talk around the campfire. We maybe try to learn from each other and share some ancient wisdom and even deal with current topics that we have in common.
Lovely.
But the idea is to try to recreate that world as best as possible. So I think people have a hard time doing this on their own, especially when 4 or 5 other members of their immediate family or neighbors are doing something completely different. How do you sit and meditate in a room when the TV is blasting next door? Something sort of fun and sort of exciting. So it's
sounds wonderful.
It is. It is a really nice way of living. We sort of try to follow our own advice, which is another thing. If what you and I are sharing right now, probably everyone who's listening has said this to a friend. You need to deal with your stress. You need to slow down. You need to carve out some time for yourself for getting back in sync and harmony. All of us have given this advice, I'm pretty sure. Because it's not only now scientifically proven, but it's common sense. And so, again, it's sort of the interesting thing to me is how we can help each other. I think we know why, just like you shared, why people don't do it. They've got so many other things on that list. It's hard to add another one. So I think we maybe can pull this off if we do it together.
Nice.
Yeah. So what's in store for you coming up? What, you have anything new?
Well, I'm actually down in, I'm calling you from Charlotte, North Carolina. It was the first day of a 10-day pledge drive tour to support my PBS show, which is called The Healing Mind, and is playing all over the country. People can check their listings. But so I'm here. I've got 5 or 6 other where I'm going to cities and appearing on their local PBS station live to help raise money for PBS, which I love PBS, and it's a good cause, and it's a great audience, and also hopefully teach them something and give them an opportunity to to tune into some things about how to use their mind to help their body heal and reduce their stress, and then I'll go home and go back to my practice.
Right. Is there anything you think is appropriate to share on radio now in a few minutes? You think that people can get a taste of what it is that you recommend?
Well, the show it's an hour-long show. It's called The Healing Mind, and probably the first, most of it is really embodied in my book and CD set called The Worry Solution, because the first order of business is interrupting this chronic, unconscious, habitual worry and stress-provoking mechanism. That if you don't recognize that, your brain is just going to be churning and just going on to create, to create more worry and create more stress. It's I sometimes thought about calling my first book, which you mentioned, The Guided Imagery for Self-Healing, calling it, if you can worry yourself sick, maybe you can think yourself well. Because it's the same pathways, right? It's the same nerves from the brain. It's the same neurotransmitters. It's the same hormones that are generated in response to the worries and the fears and the projections and so on. If you send different messages down the same pipelines, messages of calm and peacefulness and confidence and it's going to be okay, or just even neutral messages, and daydream yourself to a pleasant and beautiful place, it sends other chemical messages throughout the body that, again, help it to balance and help the natural healing mechanisms work better. So we start there, because if you don't start there, it's hard to focus and concentrate on the mental imagery, which is kind of like the Rosetta Stone of the mind, body, spirit. Really, the imagery has great effects. The example I usually use with people is, you can ask people to make saliva, and some people will be able to make more saliva. But if you ask them to take a few minutes and actually visually imagine cutting a lemon into quarters and then putting one in their mouth and biting down on the lemon and sucking the lemon juice, even over the radio, a lot of people will get kind of a feeling in their mouth, and you get this squirt of saliva because the imagery will create the physical response much better than the spoken word. So I teach people how to use words in order to evoke images that evoke that relaxation response very profoundly, and then go on to use, once you've learned to quiet your mind and once you've learned to focus inside and kind of step back and disidentify a bit from the contents of your mind, that gives you a platform where you can start to use imagery as positive suggestion to your body. You can relieve pain with it. You can help yourself get to sleep better with it. You can bring more circulation to areas of the body that need some assistance in healing. You can even boost your immune system with doing it. There's just a lot of applications directly when you learn how to use imagery for stimulating healing responses in the body. And then then, of course, you can use these receptive aspects of the imagery to go back where we started and learn how to listen to the body and allow imagery to come to mind that let you understand better what your symptoms may be saying to you, what the body may be asking you for in order to help it get back into balance. So we get a start on that in the healing mind, but that's more implied. And then I have, again, then we'd probably go to the Guided Imagery for Self-Healing book and CD set. I want to mention that I've written 3 books. You mentioned 2 of them. The other one's called Fighting Cancer from Within. It's specifically for people with cancer or their families. But each of the 3 books I've written, I've also made a set of CDs or audios now that you can download, which lead people through the guided imagery experiences that the book writes about. And it's really my attempt to make them into kind of home study courses, like the book gives you, quote, left brain, unquote, information, the science, case histories, why it makes sense, what the research is, and so on and so forth. But then once it makes sense to you and you just want to go into the guided imagery experience, it's best to download the audios or get the CDs, and then all you have to do is relax and let me kind of lead you and teach you how to create the kind of imagery that stimulates the kind of responses you want in the body.
Yeah, I think that, when I've gone through the materials of your work, both having met you last year and watching this recent production, which, I thought was so well done, you do this very well, and I think it touches on a number of things that people get a lot of information, in their brain, in one area of their brain that remembers data and information. But when you share it in a very personal way, when people hear your voice, when you feel the intention based on the quality of this work and the number of different media platforms in which you share simultaneously, I think it relaxes people. And in itself is the antithesis of the sympathetic nervous system. You're priming the parasympathetic pump, making people feel more secure, therefore more open. And I think it's having a physiological effect along the way, and I think it reinforces the message by having a very personal touch and a multi-sensory effect. Right. That, as you pointed out in the special, people learn in different ways.
Yeah.
But when you have your own experience, and when it's a full-thickness experience,
exactly,
then it's a different type of learning. The quality of the learning is not about now just in your memory banks, but it's in every cell of your body, in your nervous system network. And it sort of is, if we're thinking about our bodies a little bit like a computer, we change the program.
That's exactly right.
And that's why I think it's particularly effective.
Thank you for noticing that, Mike. No, it's absolutely right. The data and the science and the writing and the talking that we do and so on, it's really to let people know that, hey, this is real. The science behind it is very solid. There's tons and tons of research and science on it. And it's, the hoped-for outcome from my perspective is it makes enough sense to people that they're willing to let go of that kind of thinking for a few moments and let themselves slip into this state of deep, peaceful relaxation, but being very aware and very awake and concentrating, because it is a felt experience that you have to have. It's like, I often tell people, it's kind of like puberty. You know, you could read up a lot on puberty when you were 10 or 11 years old, you know, if you wanted to.
Right.
But it will not give you any real idea of what it's going to be like when you change from a child into a man or a woman, you know. You're going to have new thoughts, you're going to have new physical experiences, you can have a new body, or any kind of big thing like that, like when you get married or when you have children or when you get old, you know, when you first have sex. You can read about it, think about it, hear about it, but there's nothing like actually experiencing it. And once you experience it, then you've got a sense of, oh, I get it. This is what this is about. And so all the rest of it is just trying to get people to, okay, now let go, just hit the play button. You're in a safe place. You're with an experienced teacher. You know, I've got tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people to do this through one kind of media or another. And just let it go and see what the experience is like, because that's when you'll know, you know, oh, this is good. This is nice. This feels good. This is safe, you know. And a lot of times people are afraid to do that. One of the most common, you know, you were asking about why people might not do this. Besides being too busy, one of the most common things I hear is, I don't like to let go of control. I have to be in control, you know. And I ask people, I say, well, think about it. I understand that. I acknowledge that. I even respect it. But how much control do you have if you can't even relax your body? You know, your body under normal circumstances would be relaxed, and it would only get tense under certain conditions. If you were being pursued by a predator, if you were being attacked by another human, you know, if you encountered some kind of big natural phenomenon, that's when you would get tense, and most of the time you would be relaxed. In our lives, in our modern lives, it's completely the other way. We've gotten very, very good at being tense and being prepared for onslaught and prepared for battle, and we've just lost the experience of being relaxed. And it's pretty easy once you decide you're going to put a little bit of time into it, and it feels completely differently. The physiology is completely different. It lets the body's innate healing response work. So you're right. That's I sometimes joke and I say, you know, I found that when I did public speaking, I was putting people to sleep. So I had to find some good thing to do with that ability.
Well, but it's I wish, you know, that many more colleagues, people in the medical establishment, people who are designing the curricula for medical students, understand the impact that educating physicians this way and getting them to be on board will help deal with some of the resistance, you know, that the public has. Because I think the public is still using the physically oriented medicine as their excuse as to why they don't really have the time, or it's not as important to deal with the mind component, because the body's still, you know, there's still work to do for the body, and they just have to find a better doctor. And I think if more doctors were saying, no, it's not a better doctor you need, nor do you need the pharmaceuticals that I could prescribe you as the first line. You know, primary care is what you do for yourself, so let's start there. And let's pick up on some of the tools that are available to you, and some of the things that our colleagues, such as Dr. Martin Rossman, have produced, could be easily made available at minimal costs for people compared to the cost of a month of prescription medications.
No, absolutely.
As an aside. And the quality of life benefits and the physical responses far superior. I'm hoping someday, very soon, the medical establishment embraces this, because I think that until they do, I'm still out there being carefully and constructively critical of our colleagues who themselves are resistant, because as you pointed out, there's so much data now, medical data, to support this as an imperative. To me, it's a little, I don't want to go too far, but it's not the best practice to not offer it sooner.
No, but they don't know what to do. They're not trained for it, you know, and they don't have the time, you know. So there's a lot of excuses, and you and I have chosen to go another path, and I want to encourage any of our colleagues who are listening to think about how they could incorporate it in their practice. You know, Michael, I get to talk to docs periodically at grand rounds. They invite me to come, and I do this presentation that I call the art and science of mind-body medicine, and it takes them through a review of literature and so on, and why it's important and what to do and so on. But I started a number of years ago. I started asking 2 questions before I went into my lecture or my dog and pony show, and I started asking the docs. I started, before I start, how many of you think that people's attitudes, their ability to handle stress, their mind-body connection is a critical aspect of their health? And you know how many of them raise their hands? 100%.
Right.
Immediately. Yeah. They don't look around. They don't look to see who else raised their hand. They just shoot their hands up. And then the second question I ask them is, how many of you have ever had any training in teaching your patients how to use their mind-body connection for help? And about 2 out of 100 raise their hands.
Marty, we're going to end there because I think that's just an important final point. So don't wait for your doctor is the message. Although we're going to try to encourage her. Yeah. Take this into your own hands. This is the nature of slow medicine. Thank you for listening. Thank the Mayer Foundation for supporting this program. Of course, Dr. Martin Rossman for joining me today. You can come to Sunraven tomorrow, November 29th, for our New Moon event, and December 18th for our open house. Next week, we'll be talking about financial health. Till then, take care.